So, people have been asking me what the origin story of this book, Ordinary Mysticism, is. And I don't know if it has any clear beginning, but the way that it finally sparked into life was that I was interviewing my literary hero and friend, Annie Lamott, on a mystical summit, a mystic summit a couple of years ago, and she gave a beautiful talk. I mean, we had a great conversation, but she'd really prepared for the conversation and she had certain points that she wanted to make about walking through this life with a mystical gaze, that we're all mystics, really. And it was a beautiful conversation. And afterwards, we were off camera. Annie said to me, Mirabai, this is a book and I think you should write it. I'm not going to write it. You should write it. And people say things like that to me sometimes. And, I stashed away the idea, but really it's their idea, not mine. But in this case, there was something that made that flame catch and flare up into a really clear vision of this book. And I think that's because the fire of that idea melded with the fire that was already overtaking my own soul. In that I've spent a lifetime, as many of you know, but some of you might not, studying the mystics of all the world's great spiritual traditions, but not just studying the mystics themselves, whose lives and whose stories totally inspire me and with which I've been able to inspire some others through my books, but also practicing the mystical traditions that they come from, like deeply encountering these spiritual paths, not just looking at them, but allowing them to change me from within. So a dedicated life of spiritual practice across the landscape of the human faith traditions. And yet, over the years, it's almost like the more I've become known and recognized as some kind of expert on the mystical traditions, the less interested I am in religion. This hasn't been a conflict exactly, but it's been an interesting dynamic in my being. So I have been very naturally deconstructing the very traditions that I had spent a life investigating and exploring and sharing. And so when Annie said, let's reclaim everyday life as being the domain of the divine, it was like, yes, that's where I'm at. And that's what I want to find out more about. So every time I write a book, it is for me an exploration. It's a series often of epiphanies. Like, oh, wow. Showing up to explore this idea, like how do you see the face of God in community, in a broken person, in your own beautiful broken self. I don't just write about it, it's not just an exercise for me. It becomes a deep spiritual encounter with that which I am writing about, right? And that was true for me with this book. And so I've been left really at the end of the process, now that the book is birthing into the world, in liminal space again. I've been here before in my life. I'm sure you have too. Like, I don't really know right now. I love the world's religions, but you give me religious beliefs and religiosity and I recoil. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. It's like developing a food allergy in your 60s. Like, I used to love hazelnuts. Now I can't eat them. That's kind of where I'm at with religion. And I get to do it in the public square with all of you. So, thanks for listening.